Inshallah, I'd like to request everyone to move forward, inshallah. We'll have our short session, inshallah, and then we'll wrap up. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fih. Mubarakan alayhi kama yuhibbu Rabbuna wa yarda jalla jalaluhu wa amma nawaluhu. والصلاة والسلام على سيد الحبيب المصطفى وعلى آله وأصحابه نجوم الهدى قادة التقى أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الامي وعلى اله واصحابه وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا. Alhamdulillah, brothers, in our previous session, which is about 2 weeks ago, we discussed the journey of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Syria. And this journey of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Syria was one of the first journeys that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took with his uncle Abu Talib for the purpose of business. This was essentially a business trip, right? And it was majority of the Arabs at that time, or actually a lot of them, were into entrepreneurship. They were businessmen. This was their forte. This is what they were really good at. So Abu Talib, just like majority of the rest or a lot of the rest, was a businessman. So he would frequent Syria, and this journey was no easy task. However, this journey was very long, it was very difficult, and it was very tiresome. So Abu Talib, when he was about to set out for his journey, he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his sadness and his yearning to go with him for this journey, but he did not want to take Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam because of how long and how difficult this journey was. So, but ultimately, out of his love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his kindness, and he sallallahu alaihi wasallam's persistence, finally Abu Talib gives in and takes Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. After Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they had actually stopped for the night at a place named Basra. They met a monk by the name of Jarjis, right? And the whole story goes that Jarjis, he had a conversation with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there was very different events taking place with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the company of Jarjis, and there were very extraordinary events that had taken place. Today, inshallah, we'll be discussing another event prior to the prophethood of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this event was an event about which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself mentions that if this took place within Islam, then I would have definitely participated within it. But we need to first understand the intro to this event, how this event came to place. There was actually a series of wars or battles that were taking place. One was known as Harbul Fujjar, and this was a battle which had taken place between two tribes, and these two tribes were continuously fighting for a while, right? And the Quraysh tribe being one of them, right? They eventually would actually in the middle would have suffered heavy losses, and after suffering heavy losses, eventually the Quraysh came out on top, and they emerged victorious. But the question was, how long will these battles continue to happen? How long will there be bloodshed? How long will people continue to lose their lives due to these wars or these battles and these scuffles? So finally, there was a treaty that was to be written. There was a treaty that was to be written, and this treaty, the main purpose of it was that it basically allow the two parties to find common grounds, and these two parties basically, write a peace treaty amongst themselves, which will denote that there will be no more fighting afterwards. There was this treaty, right, is known as Halful Fudul. This treaty is known as Halful Fudul, and this Halful Fudul was something which would be the deciding factor, or it would be such a peace treaty between two parties to say that there will be no more fighting anymore at all. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so when the peace treaty was being written, it was being written at a person's home by the name of Abdullah bin Jad'an. Abdullah bin Jad'an's home was the place where this peace treaty was being basically signed and sealed. That will basically say that there will be no fighting anymore, right? And it was being written at this person's home. While it was being written at this person's home, right? The peace treaty went through, the agreement was made. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was actually within the home of Abdullah bin Jad'an when this peace treaty was being written. But prior to the Hilf al-Fudul, while the battle of Harb al-Fujjar was going on, some scholars are of the opinion that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was also within the battle. But the scholars actually clarify. They say that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not fight at all. The most that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did at the time, because of course it was a battle of huge clans, the Quraysh and I think it was the Qais tribe, they were going head on, they were going head to head, right? These two tribes going head to head, it meant that all the men who were eligible for fighting, who were eligible to basically be enrolled, they had to go fight. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never actually took part in the fight. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually never took part within this fight, but rather he was there aiding the soldiers by handing them arrows or fallen arrows and aiding them with anything, any little errands or things that needed to be done. He was aiding them with those things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the treaty was signed and it was written, as I mentioned, at the place of Abdullah bin Jad'an. Allama Suhaili is actually the one who clarifies this portion, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never actually fought and took part physically within this battle. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that during the launch of this accord, during the launch of this treaty, I was also present at Abdullah bin Jad'an's home. Even if I was offered red camels, and this was a huge commodity of the time. Now we can try to understand this in our day and age as a very, very high-end luxury car. A red camel was something known to be a very huge commodity, and it was something owned by the ultra wealthy and the people who had an immense wealth to their name. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that even if I was offered red camels in comparison, if I was offered red camels for this certain treaty, I would never have taken them. Then he sallallahu alaihi wasallam further mentions, now in Islam, if I were invited to take part within this treaty or in this accord, then I would have definitely participated within it. Abdullah bin Jad'an was actually the cousin of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, right? Once Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, O Prophet of Allah, Abdullah bin Jad'an was an extraordinarily hospitable man. He was incredibly fond of feeding people. Will this benefit him in any way on the Day of Judgment? Will this deed of his, will his kindness, his hospitality, his respect and his kindness towards people, will this be of any benefit to him? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, and this is narrated in Muslim. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied that no, because he felt short of reciting this following dua, the translation of which is, "O my sustainer, pardon my sins on the day of reckoning." In other words, that Abdullah bin Jad'an, despite his hospitality, despite his kindness, despite his outgoingness, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, since that he did not beg for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness, since he did not ask the one creator for his pardon in that part of his life, then he will not be amongst those who will gain anything for what they have given in this world. Right? So this was just one treaty which took place in the time of Jahiliyyah. But at the same time, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam adored this treaty and loved it so much that he himself said that even if it were to take place within Islam, because if you look at the narration, he says that if there were to take place in Islam, I would have definitely participated. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is how much he loved this, and this was essentially for the people who were losing their lives for no reason, people who were being hurt, children who were becoming orphans, children who were losing their parents, their families, and everyone. Right? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, this was an aid for the people who were in need. So that's why if it was in Islam, I would have definitely taken part in it. So inshallah, next week we will continue forward, right? And we will start the next portion, around after Hilf al-Fudul. And one thing we must remember, that these things that Rasulullah, these events which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took part in, the way that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took part in them is also very unique as well. right? When Allama Suhaili, he clarifies that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not take part in any killing. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not take part in any bloodshed. But the way that he did take part, right? Because of course he was enrolled, he was eligible for battle. If someone, if even if this day and age, if the need arises, sometimes they can draft people against their will. So in one sense, we can think that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, against his will, or if not against his will, he was drafted because the men who were eligible and who needed to fight, they had to go into battle. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, once again, as Allama Suhaili, he clarifies, did not take part in the fighting at all whatsoever. So we must understand that very clearly. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the ability to benefit. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallah bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Inshallah, next week we'll be discussing how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was actually given the title of Al-Amin. We hear about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being As-Sadiq, Al-Amin, right? But how did this nickname or title come around? Inshallah, we'll be discussing that next week. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Brothers, we'll have a quick meeting. I'll try to make sure that the meeting is very short. I will try to wrap up in 15 minutes.